So I'm really glad to be here today. I've been excited about sharing these practices with you, these mindfulness practices, and not least of all because I have been using them myself a lot lately. And, um, and therefore, I want to share them because they've been really enhancing my life. And a lot of them won't be anything, brand new to you. Um, and a lot of them, that is to say, will be very familiar, I'm sure. And yet, at the same time, it seems like mindfulness is something that we can receive many reminders of, and it's still challenging to do on a daily basis. So, welcome. I'm going to have a sip of water before I get going here and find a comfortable seat as I do this. And we're going to begin with a mantra, Guru mantra, which I'll chant. And then we will take a minute for mindfulness. Okay, find a comfortable seat. I'm going to chant a mantra that I learned from my teacher, my Ayurveda teacher. It's called the Guru Mantra, and it invites the Guru within us to come forth and support us. Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwaraha, Guru Sakshat Para Brahma Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Notice what you're noticing right now. Your eyes may be open or closed. Let's take about a minute and notice what we notice, as one likes to say. Eyes can be open or closed. I'm going to open mine. Notice what you notice. You might look at an individual focal point if your eyes are open, or you may look around. There's no rules. Just notice what you notice in this time, inwardly and outwardly. If you do have a pen and paper, feel free to write down what you've just noticed in that little bit of time we took to notice what we're noticing. The language around mindfulness can be quite funny, and it can also be quite confusing. So I am going to talk a little bit about what I mean when I'm saying mindfulness. So the mindfulness that I'm talking about, and I don't claim that this is the only definition of mindfulness, but it is what I'm talking about today. Uh, Mindfulness is a state of being aware of and present with what is happening in the here and now in your immediate internal and external environment. So we use the word awareness in a lot of different ways, and that's why I added that it's being the state of being aware of and present with. because we might say that we're aware of, world events, um, but they're not part of our immediate internal or external environment for most of us at most times. So that's not what I'm talking about. That's not the kind of awareness I'm talking about. So I'm talking about mindfulness as a state of being aware of and present with what is happening right now in my internal and external environment. We can only be aware of so many things at once. So it's not a matter of being aware of everything happening in our internal and external environment. It's just a matter of being aware of and present with one or more things happening in our internal and external environment. So, what is mindfulness? We've talked a bit about what mindfulness is now. So, mindfulness your experience of a mindful state might include uh, the experience of things suddenly looking brighter, or you might suddenly be aware, things might feel a little bit larger than life. I know the first time that that I sort of really felt really present in my environment and was aware of it. Um, which is, that's a philosophical thing we could get caught up in that we won't talk about today is, am I mindful if I'm thinking about being mindful? But we'll talk a bit about it. But I just remember feeling like I was suddenly in a movie theater. And I think I posted a blog article coincidentally recently that I had written a while back that said that. But when you're really present and you're aware, maybe you've had the experience of suddenly things seem brighter. You're like, wow, it seems like there's suddenly more light in here, or things seem brighter, or the outlines of objects seem more sharp. You're more aware of where physical objects begin and end, or you're suddenly aware of your breath. You might also be suddenly more aware of sounds around you, and you might be aware of more than one of these things at a time. And so our experience of mindfulness can be different from moment to moment in terms of what we're mindful of, what we're aware of in the moment um, that we're mindful, because there's all kinds of things going on, obviously, around us, and we can't be aware of all of them all the time. So, how is mindfulness different from meditation? I want to talk about this briefly. Uh, Meditation can be a springboard for mindfulness, and mindfulness can be a springboard for meditation. So I know that for me, having a meditation practice I had a meditation practice for about a year. I used a book called The Presence Process that I really appreciated at the time and was very useful for me. So I do recommend it if you do well with a sort of a system that you can follow. But in this presence process, I was doing 15 minutes of breath awareness, morning and night. Now, the author doesn't call it a meditation, and it really is more of a breath awareness practice than anything. So, 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes at night, right before bed, every day. And I think for me, that was a really great foundation for me developing mindfulness in everyday life. So I want to say you don't have to have that kind of practice necessarily to develop mindfulness, but I think it can be helpful. So some kind of meditation or daily awareness practice that is very specific and very consistent, and that is very sort of in a container, like mine was, sitting and noticing the breath for 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes at night. I think that can be very helpful, but I don't necessarily think it's necessary. And then another question you might have is, do I, so how is mindfulness different from meditation? I didn't quite answer that. I think I answered the question, do I have to meditate to be mindful? And I don't think you do have to meditate to be mindful, but I do think the practices support each other well. If I meditate, does that mean that I'm also mindful? No, not necessarily. It might be, and you might have experienced this, that when you're meditating, you are very able to give your full attention to what is happening inside you, if that is what your meditation practice looks like. And it may be that as soon as you get up out of the chair or off the cushion or off the yoga mat, that you find yourself in the same distracted mental patterns that you've experienced before, even after maybe months or years of meditation. So I think everyone's experience of the relationship between mindfulness and meditation is different. So then I said, I was asking, how is mindfulness different from meditation? Um, I do see, and again, I'm not saying that my definitions or my differentiations are everyone's, but for me, the way that they're different is a meditation practice is something that I do in stillness. A lot of people talk about meditative walk or a walking meditation. And that's okay if I'm not saying that's not a meditation, but for me, the way I think I could have a meditative walk. I can walk meditatively. I can do other activities meditatively with a meditative quality. But for me, when I say meditation, I mean being still, closing my eyes, and turning my attention inward to notice what is happening inside me. So for me, meditation and mindfulness are different because mindfulness is something that I'm doing with my eyes open and throughout my day. And I am doing my best to remember, to bring attention, to be aware, to be present with what is happening inside me and in my immediate surroundings throughout the day. So that's the difference between meditation and mindfulness for me. Now, thinking. So, can I be mindful if I'm thinking? Or are they mutually exclusive? So, yes, you can be mindful when you're thinking. It's the difference is that I'm aware that I'm thinking when I'm mindful. I'm mindful, I'm mindful of thought. So, so the fact that thoughts are in your mind does not mean that you are not mindful in that moment. The difference between being mindful of thought and being lost in thought is what you want to consider and look at. So an analogy that I like using is the difference between sitting on a dock at the edge of a lake and looking out at a bunch of lovely sailboats. Imagine looking out at all these sailboats and they're all different colors. So if I'm sitting on the dock and I'm watching these beautiful sailboats go by, it's like being mindful, or it can be also the quality of the mind during meditation. So the quality of the mind during meditation and mindfulness might be similar, but the practices themselves, I think, look different because for me, mindfulness is when my eyes are open and I'm going about my daily activities whilst also being mindful of what is happening inside and outside in my immediate now moment. Whereas meditation for me is a sit down, eyes closed stillness practice. So if I'm sitting on that dock and I'm watching the boats go by, and I'm aware that I'm sitting on the dock and watching the boats, then I'm in a state of mindfulness. But the minute that I get into a boat and drift away and I don't realize that I got in the boat and now I'm like, not in the anywhere near the dock anymore. I look up from the boat and I'm like, "Oh my gosh," and the dock is across the lake and I'm not sitting on it anymore. I've been in the boat and I didn't even realize I was in the boat. To me, that is the state we spend most of our time in. And I hope, for you that may not be true. And so but the idea of mindfulness is spending more time sitting on the dock, noticing the boats without falling into the boat and getting carried away in the boat and not realizing that you've been carried away. So that is mindfulness to me. So that is what we're talking about today. And we're talking about how can I cultivate some simple, practical daily practices to help me spend more time on the dock watching the boats, rather than falling into the boat and not realizing that I've fallen in and I've been carried away. So a few questions that you might ask yourself um, is, do I want to be mindful? Because I think that's an important question, you know, because we can have more than one want inside of us at a time, which is to say we can both want to be mindful and also maybe be a little bit afraid of being mindful. Because mindfulness means noticing what's happening in our heads. And if that's an unpleasant place to be sometimes, then we might also have a fear of being mindful because we might have a fear of encountering what's inside, going on inside there, what thoughts are there. I want to say that there's so much we can talk about in terms of mindfulness, and there's a whole other way of approaching mindfulness from a philosophical angle. But today, what I really want is to kind of get down to the practicalities of it as quickly as possible. But I don't want to totally gloss over the philosophical side of it. So that's what I'm pointing to here. What I'm pointing to here is I'm pointing to the acknowledgement that we may be at times conflicted about whether we actually want to be mindful or not, because our internal environment is not always a pleasant place. And that's okay. It's okay to not always want to be mindful. So perhaps putting it another way might be sometimes we want to be distracted. Sometimes we want to be distracted because what's going on in our bodies or in our minds is unpleasant and we don't want to be with it. And that's okay. Distraction can be a very healthy coping and processing mechanism for unpleasant things in our bodies and minds. So let us not discount the value of mindfully employed distraction. Mm? So, as an example, I lost my mom last year. And after losing my mom, it was the first time in my life that I actively employed distraction as a tactic for coping with grief, because I didn't want to sit with that grief all the time. I didn't want to sit with the thoughts and feelings in my body and mind regarding that loss all the time. It was too much to be with it all the time. So let's acknowledge that while we do want to be mindful more of the time, we may not want to be mindful all of the time. And I can be mindful of not wanting to be mindful and then dive wholeheartedly into some glorious distraction, anything from a wonderful TV show to, to a conversation with a friend about what's going on in their life or some other thing. One thing we can distinguish between is distractions that are nourishing and ultimately nourishing and healthy, um, and ones that are not so healthy. So I think most of my distractions were quite healthy, and so I embraced them when I needed them, and I encourage you to do the same. However, I think there's a place in the middle here where some of us really like the entertainment that is our thoughts. So that's another thing to consider is, do you like to be entertained by where your mind takes you? Now, that's not right or wrong, but acknowledge it. Acknowledge that your enjoyment of being carried away on thought may keep you from practicing mindfulness more often or more effectively. And that's okay, because if you're mindful, if you're aware that you want to be entertained and that that is a competing desire with your desire to be mindful, then the overarching state is one of mindfulness. At least you know, you're aware in certain moments that, oh, in this moment I actually am really enjoying where my mind is taking me, so I'm just going to go there. And that's another kind of distraction too that we might employ. The time goes so fast in these short workshops, so let me get into some of the practices. So be curious about the conflicting desires within you that may prevent you being mindful more of the time. I'm just going to take a sip of my water, and in doing so, I'm going to be mindful of it. Oh, it's warm. Mm. So, one of the practices I wanted to talk to you about today, I kind of just demonstrated. and it's one mindful activity. So you might choose an activity, and it might not be something that you do all day, every day, but it is helpful when it is something that you do for a part of every day. So you might say, okay, the mindful activity I'm going to work with is I'm going to work with being mindful during my morning tea, coffee, hot water, some morning practice that you have. It doesn't have to be around consuming something. I'm going to take another sip. But mindfulness can be more practically employed and practiced often when we choose an activity that we do every day anyway, and during which we may be in the habit of becoming lost in thought. So you might choose, um, you know, Thich Nhat Hanh talks about the dishes. If you do dishes, I had a dishwasher in a recent home and I disliked it. I didn't use it at all because I love doing my dishes to do the dishes. So it might be dishes, it might be cleaning, or even just one thing that you clean frequently enough, like maybe wiping the kitchen counter becomes your mindfulness activity because most of us have to do that in a day. Maybe brushing your hair or your teeth is the one thing that you decide to do mindfully. So, as I say these things, I would love for you to start thinking about, okay, which one am I going to pick? It might not be one that I say, but let your crank start turning and consider, open yourself up to a curiosity about which activity might be most effective for you to bring mindfulness to every day. And you'll make that commitment today and start doing it today. So, another one might even be something just simple like putting on deodorant or getting dressed. Getting dressed usually has a few components, so that can be a nice one to choose because there's the mindfulness of thinking about your day and what it requires in terms of clothing. So if you're choosing to be aware of this, then it usually is a few minutes that you're striving to bring awareness to. Um, Although I hesitate to put the words striving and awareness beside each other. But yeah, we're just doing our best to remember to be mindful. It's kind of a funny thing. So if you choose getting dressed, you have to think about, okay, how do I need to dress today? Because I have to think about what I'm doing today. And so you're considering that in your mind, you're aware that you're considering that. And then you're looking for the clothes, you're getting them from their places, and then you're putting the clothes on your body. And then maybe you're looking in the mirror. So that can be, that's a fairly lengthy and elaborate process, more so than like brushing your teeth or wiping the counter, but they're all great. There's not one that's better than the other. So, what else? You might choose as your mindful daily activity gardening or watering the plants, walking, driving, or riding, depending on how you tend to get around. Or you might say, okay, I'm going to be mindful every time I'm standing in line or waiting for something. If I'm waiting for a text, if I'm texting with someone, every time I'm waiting for them to reply, that's when I'm going to do my best to remember to be mindful. I'm going to just, oh, I'm having this text conversation and I'm waiting for them to reply. Waiting, waiting, mindful in those moments. Maybe you suddenly notice the breath. So, what you end up noticing when you're mindful, that is, it doesn't really matter. But the fact that you suddenly become present with what's going on because you've decided that this is your one mindful activity for the day and that you're suddenly able to attend and focus because you've made that commitment. That is mindfulness. And you might suddenly notice your breath, you might not, you might suddenly notice sounds around you, you might suddenly notice that you're standing in a funny way or sitting in a funny way. Whatever you notice is just like, that's just a surprise. but you're noticing. Suddenly you're aware of more in your present internal and external environment than you were before. So suddenly you're mindful, you're here. So those are some things, one mindful daily activity. So I encourage you to choose one daily activity during which you will make the commitment to do your best to remember to be mindful every day. So that's one practice. Another practice that we did at the beginning of this little workshop was 1 minute of mindfulness. So you could set an alarm, especially if you're working from home and you have a lot of time to yourself, and especially if you work on a device, on a computer, and you tend to get lost for long periods of time. Set your alarm for every hour. And every hour, as that alarm goes off, take 1 minute for mindfulness. Just pause and notice what you notice. You might notice thought, you might notice your breath, notice what you notice. So 1 minute of mindfulness. What I've been working with lately myself is transition mindfulness. So at the beginning of this workshop, I did a mantra. I chanted a mantra that my teacher used to chant. It was one of many my Ayurveda teacher, Dr. Ladd, used to chant before we would begin each session of learning. And I really transition mindfulness works really well for me lately. I've been committing to practice it as often as I can. And for me, it was fairly general. I decided I was going to practice bringing mindfulness to whenever I changed from one activity to another. So transition mindfulness. So the ways in which you might choose to use transition mindfulness is you might use it, some more obvious ways maybe is asana transitions. So I had a practice for a year when I was trying to engage and use Mula Bandha more effectively in my yoga practice, when I made a commitment that I wasn't going to move from one asana to the next, or even begin to move until I was aware of Mula Bandha and had the quality of support there that I wanted. So that transition mindfulness practice was around developing my use of Mula Bandha, but yours could be just developing the practice of mindfulness in transitional moments. So some moments are asana transitions, meal times, and for a lot of people, with religion or spiritual practices, they say prayers. And I think prayers, just like mantra, are often a way of bringing mindfulness and presence to a boundary of, I'm not doing this anymore, and now I'm about to do this. And so ritual, mantra, prayer, all these things can bring our awareness to the transitions and mark the end of one thing and the beginning of another. So meal times, a really powerful one might be screen time. So whenever I go to my screen, my computer, my phone, my tablet, or away from my screen, I'm going to bring mindfulness to that movement toward it and be aware of what I'm about to do, or even changing from one website to another. Oh my heavens, if we can bring, awareness to that. So just being mindful that I am going from looking at this thing on the screen to looking at that thing on the screen. Time with other people. So as I transition toward a time with another person, or as I move away from it, bringing mindfulness to that transition. Or again, the transition of beginning to drive and then stopping driving, beginning to ride my bike and then stopping riding my bike, and then beginning to a walk and then finishing a walk. So anything where there's a transition from one activity to another, or where the eyes move from one place to another, or where my attention moves, which goes with my eyes usually, then we can bring awareness to that. I'm going a little bit over time, and I hope that's okay. So these are all great ideas, but how can we remember to do them? And that's where one of the practices comes in that I've been using a lot lately, which is sticky notes. And so I had said bring colored pens and so on, but ultimately you'll end up doing that part of the activity by yourself. But I have some ideas for you for things that you might write on your sticky notes. So one sticky note that I have that I put where I can see it when I'm on the toilet is I have a sticky note that says from Thich Nhat Hanh, Which seeds are you watering? Which seeds are you watering? And that one's really powerful for me because it's a very beautiful, benign, and yet powerful reminder to notice, just to notice what's happening in my mind right now. What are the thoughts there? Which seeds am I watering? So if you're not familiar with the analogy, Thich Nhat Hanh uses this analogy, um, suggesting that there are many seeds in our minds, and that we can develop the capacity to choose which ones we give attention to and which ones we don't. I'm not saying any of this is easy, but we can develop the capacity. So where are you? That's another sticky note option you could put on a sticky note. Where are you? Where are you right now? Oh, and it's not an admonishment for being anywhere else. It's just a way of, oh, where am I indeed? Where am I in fact? Because we can travel to so many places in such a short time in our minds, as I'm sure you know. What are you holding on to? That's a little bit more involved. It's a little bit more involved. What are you holding on to? So you could write that on a sticky note. Um, Thich Nhat Hanh also has a story about cows. I'm going to let you find that one yourself. You can just probably Google Thich Nhat Hanh and cows if you haven't read that one. It's in the book. Well, it's probably in more than one place, but I know you can find it on the internet. And I have it in a book, No Mud, No Lotus. And there's a story about cows. You can read it. And so I think on a sticky note, it could be fun to put, which cow are you thinking about right now? Which cow are you thinking about right now? And then another really simple one that I like is, are you inhaling or exhaling? Are you inhaling or exhaling? So I think my favorite ones right now are, which seeds are you watering? And are you inhaling or exhaling? So once you've chosen 3 things that you'll put on a note, and they can be any other thing that will help bring your awareness to what is happening right now. Make those 3 sticky notes, make them pretty, colorful pens, however you want them to look, or make them simple. Then you decide where to put them. And so you can put them in a location. I used to have one, when I woke up, one of the first things I would see is I had a dresser quite close to my bed in my little bedroom in Vancouver. And I put a note there, and it said, um, and it said, it won't last. That's what makes it so precious. And the funny thing is, I had a south-facing window, and over the years that I lived in that place, the the sun through the window actually um, blanched the paper, so I could no longer see the writing. It was gone. It was blanched from the sun, and it's quite poignant because it said, "It won't last. That's what makes it so precious." So find 3 places in your daily life where you'll see this. It could be the first thing you look at in the morning or the last thing before you go to bed. It could be the bathroom mirror or whatever you look at when you're on the toilet. It could be on the door that you leave the house through, or what you see when you first come back in the door. So again, coming back to transition mindfulness. And then um, And then another thing I like the idea of writing in on a piece of paper might be, how would the future me like me to spend this moment? How would the future me like me to spend this moment? And so that's a little bit more involved again, because then kind of leads to a thought process. So um, so yeah, that's some ideas, and a few final ideas that I want to share with you, and then I'll wrap this up. Is a writing prompt that I've been working with lately, which is, and back to the cow story by Thich Nhat Hanh. Which cow are you holding on to that you might be able to let go of? So read the short little cow story, and then you could use that writing prompt if you're a journal writer. Which cow are you holding on to that you might be able to let go of? And then a daily mantra. A daily mantra can be another wonderful way to bring awareness into your daily life. And in the presence process, the book that I used years ago, there was a weekly, It was an affirmation, and affirmations are different from mindfulness. But all that to say that bringing a daily mantra or a weekly mantra that you work with to bring mindfulness into daily life. And a very simple, beautiful one again from Thich Nhat Hanh is breathing in. He says, I know that I am breathing in. I am aware that I am breathing in. However you want to say it. So breathing in, I am aware that I am breathing in. Breathing out, I am aware that I'm breathing out. And I can just try to bring my attention to that mantra as often as I can through my day for a whole week or just for a day. And then finally, drishti, still eyes, still mind. So if you're still with me, and thank you for staying if you were able to, because we're finishing a little late, just bring your gaze to something, any one thing that you can see in your central field of vision right now. And really look at that thing. Helps if it's beautiful. See if you can just relax your eyes as you gaze at it. So perhaps you combine one or more of these practices. Perhaps you choose 1 minute of mindfulness and you also choose a drishti during that minute of mindfulness. Or perhaps you choose to have 1 minute of mindfulness, you choose to use your mantra during that 1 minute of mindfulness. Or maybe you use your sticky notes to remind you to take 1 minute of mindfulness. So as soon as you see a sticky note, you combine that with, oh, now I'm going to take a minute of mindfulness. Or maybe you have your mantra on a sticky note by your kitchen sink, and while you're doing the dishes, you use your mantra to remain present with doing the dishes. So you can use all these practices together. Many of them you already know and use in your yoga practice and may already be using in your daily life. But I'm here to encourage you and to let you know um, that if you're new to the mindfulness practice, or even if you've been practicing for some years, I've been working pretty darn hard at it for probably about 13 years, and I'm always a beginner. So just remember that it's a beautiful gift that will keep giving forever, and that to remain curious um, is probably the only thing required to continue to move along this path. So remaining curious, how might I be more mindful today, right now, even? Thank you for joining me. Thank you for staying if you were able to. If you're watching this later, or even now, and you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments. So wishing you a mindful day. And at that, I'm going to sign off. But before I do, I'm going to stay on screen to take one last mindful moment before I hit the finish button.